Welcome to all of you. I'm Maria Rodriguez Alcázar. I'm board member at the European Youth Forum, and I'm very happy to be hosting this virtual forum where we will launch the Youth Progress Index. First, I want to acknowledge how difficult this year has been. The pandemic has brought a loss of jobs, also have given rise of many health issues, and in particular for young people, mental health issues. It has impacted in our education, in our access to digital rights, but also it has meant a loss of a lot of human lives. So young people have been among the most impacted by this crisis, and it will be us and the future generation who will suffer the most if we don't resolve now both the impacts that have been created during this crisis, but also the climate crisis. The reason why we have created this Youth Progress Index is both to create hard data about the lives of young people, but also to inform policymakers and investment decisions. This is the second edition of the Youth Progress Index, and we are particularly proud of what we have managed to do. We have a 10-year series looking at trends in terms of young people's well-being and the access to our rights from 2010 to 2020. Second, we have looked deeper into some issues related to COVID-19, the digital revolution, and also a shrinking space for young people. And thirdly, last but not least, we are pioneering a sustainable adjustment to the index, but we are particularly excited ahead of the COP26 that is happening this year. So now what we need is for policymakers to take note and use the data and inform policies that they are making. But also we hope that this Youth Progress Index will be useful for youth advocates across the world to jump from the index to action. We have today an exciting program and a lineup of speakers. So I invite you to please engage in the social media conversation through the hashtag YouthProgress. A few of the sessions that we will have are interviews that we had in the past few days, but the majority of the sessions will be live sessions. So you will have as well the possibility to engage in the discussion, asking your questions by the hashtag AskYouthProgress. Also, for those speakers that participated in recorded interviews are willing to reply to your questions. So please do use the hashtag AskYouthProgress to also ask them your questions. With further ado, let me introduce my fellow colleague that is the first speaker in our session today. I'm welcoming Silvia Marcula, the president of the European Youth Forum. For those who don't know, the European Youth Forum is the platform composed by more than 100 youth organizations and national youth councils across Europe, and is bringing the voice of young people in Europe and engaging in policy making. So please, Celia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. It's my great pleasure to be here today at the launch of the Youth Progress Index. And we at the Youth Forum, we work every day to empower young people to participate actively in society and to improve the conditions for young people in their lives. We represent the interests of young people in Europe and youth organizations in Europe and work to advancing the rights of young people. And this is really the perspective that we're looking from when we look at the world, how we can improve those rights that we have as youth and as a generation. Now, I'll be briefly speaking about the Youth Progress Index and why it really matters, but I also have the great honor to present to you our Youth Progress Index ambassadors. We'll come to that in a minute, but firstly on the Youth Progress Index. Now, as Maria noted, youth over the globe have suffered quite a lot from the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, and yet it didn't impact all of us equally. What the pandemic has really done is to further multiply and expose existing inequalities in the world. So the poorest and the most marginalized in our societies, they also were the ones suffering the most from this pandemic. Now, if we look at GDP alone, when we measure progress in our societies, we miss a lot of those inequalities in our societies and between countries as well. We miss some of the elements which are crucial if we want to improve the quality of young people's lives. Now, that's really what we're trying to do with the Youth Progress Index. We're trying to provide a tool for policymakers, as well as for us as activists, to look beyond just economic indicators and look more at the social progress and environmental indicators. Now, we believe, together with many others, that it's crucial to also achieve the sustainable development goals through this matter, through looking at our societies holistically in that regards, not just at the economic factors. And this is very relevant for young people. In our view, sustainable development, it should be regarded as an organizing principle. It's a cross-cutting theme with three interrelated domains: the society, economy, and the environment. And it should be supported. It should support this vision for a society in which the needs and rights for everyone, including future generations, are met. And also that those rights are met within the boundaries and means of the planet. In our work, we aim to embed this sustainability dimension and a rights-based approach in everything that we do. We try to ensure that we do not only represent the interest of young people here today, but also the rights of future generations of young people on the European continent and beyond. Whether we talk about access to jobs or social services, about access to education or clean air, we will always aim towards advocating for those topics that with that intergenerational perspective in mind, and also the planetary boundaries. And in that sense, the Youth Progress Index that we are launching here today, with its which is our flagship report, it's a milestone, not just that, it's a step towards something. It's not the end point. It's a tool to help you and all of us to identify where investments are needed to improve well-being. So from our side, we're going to connect it with the large variety of topics that we work on with policymakers. And we hope that you will do the same. It's not just a milestone in our advocacy work this year. The Youth Progress Index is a second edition in what we hope will become a series of Youth Progress Indexes. We have a vision to produce the index every 2 years, so it becomes a flagship report, not just for us, but for all states, activists, and researchers around the world, so that we can see how they are advancing in the ranking and what the impact of those chosen policies is in the short and also in the long term. We really hope that this becomes a tool that is known and used by not just us, but by everyone when it comes to the youth progress in the world. Now, given this ambition, and as I mentioned at the start, we approached a few allies to help us in promoting the Youth Progress Index in the next 2 years and to work with us on that. So today, I am very proud to present to you our 4 Youth Progress Index ambassadors, and you will probably see them right now on a slide. I'll start with the first one, Herman Van Rompuy. He is the Emeritus President of the European Council. At the time of his election in 2009, he was Prime Minister of Belgium, and he has also served in a multitude of other government positions, such as Speaker of the House of Representatives and Minister of Budget. And it's my great pleasure to work with Mr. Van Rompuy in the conference on the conference on the future of Europe. I'm part of a high-level group in the Committee of the Regions, which Mr. Van Rompuy is chairing. And we're very happy to count on Mr. Van Rompuy as ambassador for the Youth Progress Index now. As he notes in the interview, which you will be able to find on our website on the Youth Progress Index very soon, and I quote, "The Youth Progress Index is a tool for policymakers to dive into, to see what the weak points are of the policies and address those. And the ultimate aim is to make people in your country happier and increase a sense of community, togetherness, and belonging. This is what you're judged upon at the end of a political career, not how many interviews you gave or how many votes you got." So these are some welcoming words also from him. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us today. But moving on to the next one, we have Niklas Ninas, who is a German member of the European Parliament for the Greens, and he's the co-chair of the European Parliament Interest Group on Youth. He is a strong supporter of European youth and has worked with the Youth Forum on a lot of different occasions, which we're very happy for. Mr. Ninas is the coordinator for the group in the European Parliament Committee on Regional Development, and he's a member of the Committee on Culture and Education. And on top of all of that, he is one of the very few young members of the European Parliament, paving the way for hopefully many more young people to follow in his footsteps as an MEP in the future. Then we have Yasmin Werhane, who is the founder of We Belong, a platform and podcast that amplifies the voice of new daughters of Europe. She's also an appointed expert for the European Union and the African Union, and an advocate for social and gender justice in Europe. She was recognized as Young European of the Year in 2019. It's a prize awarded annually for outstanding European individuals by the Schwarzkopf Foundation together with us at the European Youth Forum. Then we have Matthias Gruden, who is the Director of Democratic Participation at the Council of Europe. He previously served in other functions at the Council, including as Director of Policy Planning and Deputy Director of the Private Office of the Secretary General. And before his career at the Council of Europe, he was also a diplomat at the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, posted in Brussels. Now we at the Youth Forum, of course, we have the great pleasure to work closely with Mr. Gruden and his team, as the Council of Europe has an exemplary practice of co-creation policy with youth. Lastly, we also would like to acknowledge the massive, great support of none other than Yayatma Vikramanayake, the UN Secretary General's envoy on youth. And while unfortunately she couldn't be here with us today, she has supported our work on the Youth Progress Index from the very, very beginning. And she's also written the foreword of the report. So thank you very much for that. Now, I would like to thank all of these prominent professionals for the great support on the youth progress and the work that you do towards that. We look very much forward to working with you as our ambassadors on the Youth Progress Index in our work for youth rights. And now, finally, thank you very much for everyone in the audience. I have heard that there are quite great numbers of you out there looking at your screens right now. So thank you for being together with us today for this very, very important and exciting moment as we launch the Youth Progress Index of 2021. Now, back to you, Maria.
Thank you, Silvia. And thank you also for introducing our ambassadors of the Youth Progress Index, which are very much committed to working for youth rights. And also, indeed, as you commented, the Youth Progress Index is a tool for policymakers and also for youth advocates for youth rights. And we wonder, what kind of inputs does the Youth Progress Index bring? So for this, our next speaker will reply to this question. I'm delighted to welcome Michael Green, the CEO of the Social Progress Imperative. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Maria.
The Social Progress Imperative is our main partner in this project and is the organization that produces the Social Progress Index, upon which this Youth Progress Index is created. Michael will be presenting this year Youth Progress Index main findings, and yeah, there will be some time at the end for some questions, so please do not hesitate to tweet them at Ask Youth Progress via Twitter, and then we will be able to have a discussion with them. So Michael, the floor is yours.
That's great. Thank you, Maria. I must say it's been a great pleasure working with the European Youth Forum on this report. And I think to Sylvia's point, I think also continuing the work after the report comes out, taking the journey from index to action to impact, because data means nothing if it's not used as a tool to drive change in the world. And thank you all. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you gathered around the world to hear about this. And we look forward to your feedback. So the Social Progress in the Youth Progress Index. Let me just show you a bit about how this works. But as Maria was saying, this is a particular time in the world when we're living in a time of crisis. We're living in a time of crisis around COVID, and also around the climate crisis. And a real question is about how are we going to respond to this crisis? And at the end of last year, we partnered up with our friends at Ipsos and went out and asked people. We asked people across 13 countries and said, how should we respond to, how should we build back after this COVID crisis? And the response was very clear. The majority of people said, when this pandemic is over, we've got to build back focusing on sustainable social progress, not just economic growth. What's most striking was the real difference in the response by age groups. My generation, the 50 plus, lent towards economic growth. But young people, particularly under 24s, really said, we've got to prioritize a recovery from this that is focused on sustainable social progress. So I think this Youth Progress Index report is a chance to bring to the policy debate, to the public debate, these issues that really matter to young people, to make sure that they're on the agenda and part of the debate. Now, quickly to explain how the Youth Progress Index works. It's built on the framework of the Social Progress Index, which ultimately asks three fundamental questions about a society. First of all, does everyone have the basic needs of survival? Essentially food, water, shelter, safety. Secondly, it asks, does everyone have the foundations of well-being? Basic knowledge, access to information, health and wellness, and a good quality environment. And finally, does your society have opportunity for all in terms of rights, freedom of choice, inclusiveness, and access to advanced education? This is the basic framework we're using for the Youth Progress Index. And then what we did is we went out to find data to answer these questions. And here's all the data that we are using. So we've drawn 58 different social environmental outcome indicators, the majority of these coming with a focus on youth to answer these questions. And as a result, we've been able to measure 150 countries completely and 18 countries partially. You can find, if you want to dive into this, there's a full methodological report for you to enjoy and look into all the details. There's full transparency about this methodology. I'll show you what we find. What I've done here is just simply plotted the results with the Youth Progress Index on the vertical axis, and then just for comparison, just for fun, GDP per capita on the horizontal axis. And we find, perhaps unsurprisingly, that Norway is the best performing country and Central African Republic is a least well performing country. And we also see in broad terms that richer countries tend to do better on youth progress. Again, not really a surprise. If you've got more resources, you can provide more services, deliver more of the things that people need to have a good life. But also look at this chart. See that there's lots of noise around this trend line. GDP is not destiny. The choices that countries make really matter to deliver higher or lower levels of youth progress. Let me illustrate. We can think of it in terms of countries that are above the line are ones that are doing a better job in turning their economic strength into social progress. So countries like Nepal, Costa Rica, and Portugal are all overperforming on delivering youth progress relative to their wealth. Whereas other countries, Angola, the United States, and Singapore, although the USA and Singapore are both rich and pretty high social progress, they're actually underperforming in delivering on youth progress for their populations. So that's just a quick snapshot of what we're finding here on a country basis. And as I said, there's plenty more detail about each country in the report, and lots of detail to look at your own country. I want to just take a moment though and look at what this means for the world as a whole. Broadly, we've seen that there's quite an uneven pattern of progress across the different components of the Youth Progress Index model. And if you look at this chart, what we see is that the worst performing aspect of youth progress is environmental quality. And I think this is really important, and we'll talk a bit more about sustainability later. But environmental quality is definitely the worst performing area. And then we're struggling more in those aspects around opportunity, like rights and inclusiveness, etc. And why this is so striking is if we then look at the trend over time. If we look at the trend over time, over the 10 years we've been able to measure for the world, we've seen there have been some dramatic improvements in the measures of progress, particularly on access to information and communications. The technology to deliver mobile phones and mobile internet around the world has had a huge positive impact on the lives of young people. We've also seen a big improvement in access to advanced education. there's been the global expansion of higher education is seeing a big improvement on the far right-hand side. We're also on, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, seeing some solid progress in areas around basic needs like nutrition and water and sanitation and shelter. Obviously, it could be faster, but some solid progress. But then look where we're seeing the least progress. I mean, it's very striking that the worst performing aspect of youth progress was environmental quality, and you'll see that we've barely improved on this area. And then you also look then at personal rights. We see this is the one aspect that has actually deteriorated. So 10 years ago, the young people of the world had stronger rights than they do today. And I think that's so important if we're thinking about this agenda about discussing the reconstruction post-COVID and what young people want. If they need to have the rights and the civic space to exert their views, if we're seeing a shrinking space for personal rights, that is very concerning. Now, I think as Sylvia mentioned in the introduction, one thing we've also done with this index is pioneered a new approach. Sorry, let me show, before I get to that, one more thing. Quickly, just to say, although we see the world getting better, we have seen some countries actually going backwards. So we've got 6 countries that have seen a deterioration in youth progress over the last 10 years. The biggest decliners, Venezuela, Syria, perhaps no surprise. But it's very striking amongst this list of countries. Over 10 years, youth progress has actually gone backwards. Includes the United States, Australia, and Hungary, as well as Lebanon. Very, very striking results. That even over 10 years, some of these countries have actually gone backwards. Now, sustainability. We really felt with COP26 coming up, we really wanted to have a look at the sustainability lens around the Youth Progress Index. So what we've done is we've actually adjusted the index with an extra dimension around sustainability. So what we've done is we've said, what's a robust planetary boundaries framework, looking at climate change, biodiversity change, land system change, material consumption. And then we've applied that to adjust and revise the result. So we're taking into account sustainability. It's all there's quite a lot of detail here, but just to give you a very quick snapshot, what we've seen is that a lot of countries, even those that are performing at very high levels of youth progress, have seen that there's a big reduction in their score because of when you make the sustainability adjustment. But what that's telling us is that as we although we see that strong relationship with wealth, with GDP per capita that drives high levels of social progress, it's also driving a problem of sustainability. So we're actually broadly got much bigger challenges than we're facing. And we've got to confront these sustainability challenges if we're really going to deliver on a real progress, especially for future generations and through the lives of young people today. All this details in the report, lots of stuff to dive in. I commend it to you very much. And I think I also want to highlight is the report also pulls out some analysis related to some key mega trends that are really affecting young people, such as the transition to a digital society, the future of work and quality of jobs, and this issue around civic space and youth rights. There's a huge amount in there. We love feedback, so send us your feedback on the report. But also we're really excited about how this tool, this data, working with the European Youth Forum, working with that great team of ambassadors, can really drive an impact and help deliver better lives for people as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing these results of the Youth Progress Index. I would like to ask you maybe which are like 2 countries that you could highlight as for this progress in youth, 2 countries that we could look and see how they are performing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at some of those that are most improving and those that are actually being held back, I mean, I think in the decliners, I think it is very striking how we see, I think, particularly Australia, the United States lagging behind. I think particularly interesting, we've seen in general on social progress that the United States is going backwards. Why is youth progress in Australia lagging so much? I think that's I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's a really, really important question for Australia. On the other side, I think we see in terms of big improvements, I think we have seen quite a lot of countries being able to, especially those with lower youth progress, have made some of the biggest gains. I mean, even places you might not expect, like Zimbabwe, have been some of the biggest improvers on youth progress. So I think it's important to see how that there's real opportunities for quick catch up, and that there are areas of strong progress. I do think this finding around declining scores on rights is really important, because that's across the income scale. That's such a broad-based trend, and a very worrying trend in the world. And if we, and it's, I mean, we talked at the very beginning about rights-based approaches. If there's not the space for rights to be exerted, we're going to get a very distorted development pattern, and we're not going to deliver on the things that really matter to young people, I think.
Yeah, and it's not only about the youth rights approach, but also on the sustainable development goals. So maybe you can elaborate a bit more on which is the relationship between the Youth Progress Index and the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, so we very much have, when we built the Social Progress Index and that framework that we've used for the Youth Progress Index, we've really been looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and aligning it conceptually. So although we haven't got the 17 SDGs literally, we really see there's an alignment of the concepts underlying it. So this works as a measurement tool for progress against the SDGs. And I think we can say is that, yeah, although the world has made some progress on youth progress over the last 10 years, the pace of change is nowhere near fast enough to reach the SDGs, especially if you add in that sustainability adjustment. You know, the 2030 goals, we're going to miss them by decades and decades and decades if we're on the current path. This is why what young people are saying about we want a different path, a different set of priorities, is so important, because the path we're on is not going to get to where we want to get to. And policymakers and businesses have got to listen to this.
Thank you a lot for these highlights, Michael. I would like to invite again our audience to keep on tweeting, keep on the conversation on Twitter through the hashtag #AskYouthProgress, and you can send more questions to Michael Green, so he will reply to them regarding the Youth Progress Index. Thank you again. And as I said at the beginning, now we have this fantastic index, but what we need now is for policymakers to engage with it, so we can create better youth policies based on this evidence that the data are giving to us. This brings me to our next topic in the agenda today, that is the climate change, innovation, activism, or governance. For here, we had a pre-recorded discussion with Sophie Sutherland, who is the Global Communication and Marketing Director of the Social Progress Imperative. And we recently engaged in discussion with Aditi Maheshwari, the Director of Climate Action at the United Nations Secretary General Climate Action Team. So after this interview, we will have Ryan Heath, who is the Senior Editor at Politico, who will be holding as well a live discussion. Don't forget to tweet your question at #AskYouthProgress, so that we will be able to have your question on a stream to our panelists later. So now we have our pre-recorded interview to Aditi Maheshwari.
Director of Communications and Marketing for the Social Progress Imperative. Joining me today, we have Aditi Maheshwari, who is the Director of Climate Action in the Secretary General Climate Action Team at the United Nations. Aditi, thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
No, definitely. I mean, it is a huge year this year for climate. Coming up in November, we have COP26. Obviously, that's got to be on your mind. Big things that we're facing down. Would love to hear a little bit about what your plans are for the summit, what your hopes and dreams are, what success coming off the back of it would really look like. Hi, I'm Sophie Sutherland. I am the Director of Communications and Marketing for the Social Progress Imperative. Joining me today, we have Aditi Maheshwari, who is the Director of Climate Action in the Secretary General Climate Action Team at the United Nations. Aditi, thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
No, definitely. I mean, it is a huge year this year for climate. Coming up in November, we have COP26. Obviously, that's got to be on your mind. Big things that we're facing down. Would love to hear a little bit about what your plans are for the summit, what your hopes and dreams are, what success coming off the back of it would really look like.
Thanks. So, as you may have heard, but the Secretary General has been saying that this is a make or break year for our planet because climate impacts are getting worse, hitting the vulnerable the hardest, and youth will be the most impacted over their lifetimes. And the science is also very, very clear. We need to limit warming to temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're already at 1.2 degrees Celsius, so fast running out of time. That means that we need to reach net zero emissions by 2050, which to get to that, we need to have, this is going to require, we need 45% in emissions globally this decade by the end of 2030. So we know that this is actually doable, and the IEA's recent report on net zero emissions does signal that it's doable, that the technologies are there, that the economics is there, but more needs to be done to scaling it all up. And that scaling up effort is going to require a huge step up in ambition and action across three pillars. We need to see movement on the cutting of emissions, across building resilience and adaptation, and lastly around finance. And all of this needs to be underpinned by climate justice. From our perspective, fortunately, the world already has the framework within which to operate, the Paris Agreement, which requires countries to ramp up their national commitments every 5 years. This year is such a year, and this is why COP26 in Glasgow is so critical.
How optimistic are you feeling about that? I mean, you sounds like you feel full of hope, and that the COP is going to make this happen. Are you really feeling that optimistic about our chances right now?
Well, we're seeing movement. This time last year, 30% of the world was covered, 30% of emissions were covered under net zero emissions targets. Now, this year, we're already at 73% of global emissions being covered by net zero emissions targets and so there is movement. The direction of travel is there. We're also starting to see that positive movement from the G7. The recent commitment that they put in place to end international coal financing was really welcome, and it's something that the Secretary General has been calling for over several years. And so we are getting to I think we're approaching a point where that domino effect is in place. Fingers crossed, but that's what we're hoping for.
Well, we are right ahead of G7 right now. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about building back post-COVID, and we want to ensure not just an inclusive growth back, but also a sustainable one. And that's been something that leaders have been talking about a lot. What do you think? What would be an acceptable resolution for you from your point of view coming out of G7? And what would be completely unacceptable?
So I'm going to focus on the positive. And as I said, that commitment that's already come forward on ending international coal financing is really, really positive. And that's something that, we'd like to see other countries all step up and do the same. But it's crucial now that the G7 and all major economies also shift their subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables. to sort of help accelerate that shift away from coal. I think it's really essential that we, and the Secretary General has been also calling for this, that we need a breakthrough this year on building resilience and adaptation. And we need, for that to happen, we need the G7 to sort of really step up and deliver on that 100 billion commitment in public finance that was made over a decade ago. So we really do need that public finance piece to step up. And then in addition, what is going to be really critical to a breakthrough on adaptation and resilience is making sure that half of all climate finance goes to resilience and adaptation. So we need the G7 to step up at least on those three things, in addition to what they've already signaled on the whole thing of international coal finance.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that one of the things that we've seen that's been sort of playing in the positive way in terms of pressure on the private sector, right, has been the movement by the next generation to really force climate action into the forefront of the conversation. And by putting pressure and making it, you know, a huge point of pride for consumers to engage with brands and for people to really engage with private sector organizations that feel committed to that. I mean, that seems to me to really been something that's come from the youth, right? And in recent years. What do you see as being the youth sort of continual role in this way in terms of helping to drive movement and climate action forward?
So as the Secretary General said, young people have been crucial over recent years, not just holding governments to account, but putting forward solutions. And that's why the Secretary General hosted the first Youth Climate Summit in 2019. It was to give a global platform for the best youth-led climate solutions and a commitment to support and empower young people. We really need young people more than ever this year to do both. And for that, we need to make spaces for meaningful youth participation at all levels. The Secretary General has appointed a youth advisory group, and Italy is going to host a Youth for Climate Summit in late September, inviting 400 young people from around the world to participate. The UN's global youth engagement is, in overall, it's guided by the UN Youth Strategy, the Youth to 2030, and it's all framed in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. The UN has acknowledged that young people play a critical role towards achieving both the Paris Agreement, and really we stand in solidarity with them. We support and encourage the youth to continue to be the champion and for they're safeguarding their futures. Right? They are very much the sort of in a position to encourage governments to step up and ensure that action is taken that gives them the future that they want.
Great. I mean, as you know, today we're launching the Youth Progress Index, and this is the very first time that we've ever done a sustainability adjustment to the index in that way. So what that means is that we've added an extra dimension which focuses on components that reflect critical areas such as emissions, biodiversity loss, land system changes, and material consumption. As you know, our hope is that this is going to be a data-driven, way to help inform policy and investment decisions going forward by government officials at all levels. And what do you really see as the role of data in all of this? I mean, is there there's a lot of data out there, and we know that there's a lot of facts out there about what is happening to the planet and what emissions do. But what do you see as being like the hope for data to be able to really help inform policy decisions?
So I'm gonna leave commentary on specific data and findings to the report authors, but I can make some comparable points based on our experience of SDGs. And I think there just overall, the role of data is critical to inform policymakers to be able to make the decision, the best informed decisions. Data on impacts, data on risks, data on sort of exposure, data on vulnerability. Those kinds of data are critical for policymakers to be able to integrate climate risk into their policy decision making, into investment decision making, into procurement and budgetary decision making, all of which then ultimately impacts how we roll out resilience and adaptation, and also and making sure it's targeted. And so data is critical. But I think beyond that, in thinking about this, we simply cannot meet goal 13 and the Paris Agreement goals if we don't drive forward progress across all 17 SDGs and vice versa. And we need to make sure that we have data to underpin that progress, and also to measure and track progress. It's not just informing what needs to happen, but also to be able to see what has been happening and where the gaps are and where we need to step up. And I know that we need to take a holistic approach to all that we're doing here on the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. And it's been a very tough year for many young people, between COVID, the climate crisis, youth unemployment, mental health challenges, loss of life on a large scale. But the challenges and solutions are deeply interlinked, and it's now beyond doubt that societies that take a holistic approach to climate action, integrating it into all aspects of policymaking, will deliver huge advantages across many areas: equality, health, opportunities for better lives. So that is why it's critical that the trillions that are being spent on COVID recovery are aligned with both the Paris Agreement goals and the SDGs.
Great, thank you. I mean, one last thought from you. You mentioned it has been a very, very bleak year for youth around the world. Is there any final message of hope or optimism or advice that you would like to implant on the youth that are with us today?
It's been an incredibly challenging year on so many levels, and yet the youth have demonstrated resilience and been an example for the world writ large. They have stepped up in so many ways, and they have continued to push and prioritize and call for movement on issues that are important to them. And that perseverance and resilience is really critical to delivering and continuing to drive home the messages that you have been articulating so well, and pushing for the changes that you have been calling for. They are your efforts are bearing fruit. You are seeing this in terms of the kinds of movement and the level of ambition that's starting to emerge on climate. Just please keep up the good work, and we're here to support you, and we stand in solidarity, and we look forward to success on climate in the months ahead. Thank you.
Aditi, thank you. Really, it was wonderful to have you. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and those very inspiring words. Good luck at COP this year. We will be sending positive thoughts for good progress. Thank you again for joining us. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to be here, and good luck with the rest of the meeting.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'd now like to welcome our next group of panelists, but first I should introduce myself. My name is Ryan Heath. I write the Global Translations newsletter and host a podcast of the same name for Politico. And we've got a great lineup of panelists for this next discussion. So I'd like to introduce to you Joanna Drake, who is Deputy Director General at the Environment Directorate of the European Commission, obviously the executive of the EU. Welcome, Joanna.
Hello, everyone.
We've got Nicholas Ninas, who is a member of the European Parliament. So great to have elected representatives. Hi, Nicholas.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you very much.
And certainly not least, but last, we have Nadège Callier, who is a UN youth delegate for climate. So she'll be participating in the COP26 conference, representing French-speaking Belgian youth. Hi, Nadège.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Now, in recent years, we've just seen an absolute revolution in how young people engage with their future. And while I wouldn't call it a revolution, we've at least seen an evolution in the responsibility that leaders from older generations are taking in what sort of planet they give to younger people to inherit. We're going to dive into all of that in this discussion and look at both the data and the strategies for getting to net zero and what combination of them we need. And I would also say that alongside the climate crisis, we very clearly have inequality as the political theme of our times. And so for me, to bring it all together, that really forces us to think about how we go beyond an economy based on growth to one that delivers more regeneration, one that delivers more redistribution. And so we don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to try and get our panelists to talk about all of that. Let's dive in. Nicholas, maybe I could start with you as our elected representative. Obviously, there's no pretending the scale of the climate challenge, ability adjusted index here. Tell us how you would like to see all of that information integrated into EU policy. What are the sort of non-GDP measures that the EU now needs to start delivering to get us onto this better track?
Well, first of all, we have discussed the climate law this week, and we're voting on this week. I would hope for an EU that sets standards in the world by very simply, following the scientific lead. So basically, we know how much carbon dioxide equivalents we can emit until 2050. For the whole world. We know what that means for individual countries, and therefore we know what our pace and way should be for the European Union to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And therefore, we know that the current goals of 52.8% that is presented in the climate law at the moment is simply not enough in order to follow not even the 2 degree target of the Paris Climate Agreement. Far off from the 1.5 degree target. And so that's the very first thing that I hope we should do in the universal fight against climate change, is to set a clear goal where we want to go that is in line with scientific-based research, and then also for the European Union especially to be a leader in the fight against climate change, and not, once Trump is gone, lagging behind the US again, because the proposal from the Biden administration is already more far-reaching than the European ones, even though we were the ones, saying like, okay, we are the leaders in the fight against climate change. And so I think that's very devastating at the moment to see. That's the very first thing. And then I think we should ensure that all our funding is completely getting out of the support for fossil fuels, so that we eliminate any incentive to support fossil fuel combustion or any in that way, and also make sure that our transition is an honest transition by going this step, the biggest step, let's put it this way, because a lot of people are talking about, wanting to build a bridge by using gas to go into the renewable future. And I'm simply asking for, especially as a young person, for 2 reasons for that. First of all, why should we wait even longer time, and why should we spend additional money? Because if you build first up a gas infrastructure, you waste money for that, but you already know that in 20 years we need to remodel that again. And so I think that's just a waste of resources, a waste of time, and a waste of our future.
Thank you, Nicholas. I also a reminder to everyone watching that you can send questions via many platforms, including Twitter, using the hashtag #AskYouthProgress, and we'll make sure we get to some of them. Joanna, Nicholas points to a lot of logic in how the EU should construct its policies. Can you fill us in on what some of the political or policy obstacles there might be in delivering such a clear logic? And also tell us a bit about how the European Green Deal fits into delivering the sort of just transition that we need.
Right. First of all, before anything else, this is a forum for youth, and it's celebrating the youth's, I would say, activism and also positivism going forward, expressing hope. So I want to recognize that, I want to acknowledge that, and I want to fire up that as well. That youth need to remain at the center of this, not only activism, but I would say meaningful engagement as well. Number one. Number two, the Green Deal is all about a systemic approach to an endemic problem that we have been building up ourselves and maybe ignoring for far too long. So what the Green Deal aims to do is actually to join up all the dots between different policy areas. And even the way that the Green Deal initiatives have been brought about, not only conceptualized, but actually brought about, not only built up on the past, but actually took steps forward, and ambitious ones too, bold ones too. But invigorating, re-energizing, mainstreaming the sustainability mantra, and not only mantra, but actually deliverables in other policy areas, which were usually the ones that were not actually, part of the sustainability family. Today, everybody is part of that family. We are operating in a context, and the context is that of the G7. As we speak. And there we are hoping, apart from the COP26 itself, that the ambitions and the signals that will be given today and in the coming days, that it will be not only the EU is tackling environmental and climate challenges and its first priority in a systemic way, but also the biggest economies of the world will be doing the same. As you know, we will be also engaging in a few months from now with the COP26 as well, and there we hope that we can have even bolder commitments there. So we hope that the powerful message from the G7 will, to the rest of the world, will raise the bar of international climate ambition. Of course, not everything will be simple, and not everything will be based, as Nicholas was saying, on what the science dictates. But of course, this would be the ideal way forward. What I think we need to do better is to realize that if we really are serious about the 3 dimensions of sustainability, in other words, that we need them to put together people, the planet, and prosperity, okay, without to have a continuum, a seamless continuum. We also have to have monitoring tools to reflect that systemic approach as well, and bring those 3 dimensions together. There are a lot of new concepts that are being tested, and we are very much in favor of having these monitoring tools deployed. We've got the OECD with the Wellbeing Index, which is a good example. For instance, these are being tested and they are increasingly being used for policymaking at regional, national, and international level. We have at EU level the SDGs, which are really very much developed into a resilience dashboard in order to have a strategic foresight and also a transition performance index. We are working as we speak on a tool ourselves to measure progress towards the European Green Deal. We have our own, if you like, planet part of these efforts of DG Environment, and this is called the 8th Environmental Action Programme, which is a monitoring framework, and will soon organize a stakeholder workshop to discuss potential headline indicators for that, for each of the programme's priority objectives. So technically, we have come very far and we are well equipped to go beyond GDP. But of course, it's going to be very much up to us. Now, who is that us? Is it just the EU? Is it the OECD? Is it the Youth Forum? Is it the G7? No, I think it's local, regional, national governments acting in coherence and acting across borders on this. And this means that they need to ensure that the societal progress that this Green Deal translates into, in fact, will be also visible to citizens as we speak, and as they are living in their cities, as they are working in their workplaces or from home, etc.
Okay, I'm bringing Nadej now. How does that sound to you, Nadej? Is that a letdown, or is that the sort of vision that you are expecting from decision makers in Europe? And can I also ask you a little bit about how you see your role, whether that is really engaging in the technical details inside the tents at COP26, or whether you think that the most useful role of youth activists is still moving that political center of gravity, applying that very successful pressure that Greta Thunberg and the Future for Fridays movement has been applying already.
Yeah, well, about what I've heard, I think it's, of course, encouraging, because as today we know that we need to go beyond GDP, indeed, because it does not account for environmental crisis and increasing inequalities that we are facing now. So I think that indeed we need to go beyond GDP, because we need to stop using a compass that leads us in the wrong direction. And I think that initiatives and indicators such as the YPI are really, really promising, because it helps us to think in a more holistic way. And that has been highlighted before, but I think it's really, really important, because indicators are a tool, and I think they are kind of the start of the discussion, and they can help us to think about what are the values and the goals we want to reach in the future. And these values and goals, of course, to me, the goal of the society of tomorrow is not exchanging more and more services and goods. It's not a goal per se. I think on the contrary, what the youth wants today is, of course, tackling climate change, biodiversity loss, fighting racism and sexism, and stopping these inequalities. And I think all of these problems are really interconnected in the way we are living now. So it's really, really important to build on these values and try to think about indicators that can help us to monitor the goals we want to reach. I think the YPI really helps us to do that, because like reading the report, it really, really strikes me like the conclusion that so far no country can offer a model that tackle the three dimensions of social progress, of poverty, and environmental matters. And that's a bit shocking to me. That's a failure, but that's also, that's a good indicator of the challenge we will have to face as a generation. So, of course, there is encouraging movement on the part of policymakers, and that's really encouraging. But indeed, I think that the youth still has work to do, indeed, to bring that forward. And I'll say that our role is a bit of everything, I guess. I think that really activism is really, really important, and Youth for Climate really helps us to get the focus on ambition and on really bringing the media attention as well. And it's just about raising awareness and pressuring the policymakers to be more ambitious. So I guess this kind of activism is really, really important. But I think it's also important to have more, I'm not going to say lobbyist attitude, but more dialogue peer-to-peer with the decision makers, as indeed I will have the chance to be part of the Belgian delegation at the COP26. And I think these are really important moments also to have a bit of privileged dialogues with them. And in this kind of discussion, I think indicators such as the YPR are really important, because it helps us to have a common base of discussion. A common basis of discussion to talk about these challenges. So I think all kinds of roles are important, both more institutional, as I have today in my mandate, but also more activist pressure. Because yeah, I think all the ways are good to rise ambitious on these issues, because yeah, you know, to use a metaphor that I'm not the one who invented it, but like when your house is on fire, you don't focus on continuing to building it bigger. Like maybe before the problem was that your house is too small, but today the problem is that it's on fire, so you need to focus on that problem and to use easy culture yeah, to deal with that problem.
I think that is a perfect jumping off point to another theme that I wanted everyone to explore, which is this idea of less is more. So I don't mean literally that we need sort of less resources, but it strikes me that the world's problem isn't that we don't have enough GDP. It's that we're extremely inefficient in allocating it in terms of who has access to the resources they need to live a sustainable, dignified life. And then also this point that Aditi from the UN said in the previous discussion around the idea of stripping away things like fossil fuel subsidies. We don't necessarily need more and more complicated commitments to sort of reducing emissions and so on. If we would just strip away some things like the fossil fuel subsidies, then we'd be much more able to get to these broader headline targets and meet some of the other commitments that are already on the table. Nicholas, maybe could I get you to reflect on those thoughts and what we could do to strip away some of the things that are stopping us from getting to our climate targets?
Yeah, well, you already mentioned it, like stopping investing in harmful industries is the very first step, to basically not use the resources, the limited resources that we have, also in a bad way. I mean, that's the very first thing to do. I think it's also very important that we have a certain price, a realistic price for carbon dioxide, in order to ensure that we actually that not the society takes over that price, because that's what's happening at the moment. We are all paying for the fact that BP and Shell are extracting oil and combusting in it, and that big that REWE, for example, RWE, for example, is combusting coal in the middle of Europe, and so on and so forth, right? We are all paying that price because we have to invest then in higher dams and in every measure to get carbon dioxide out, and we are losing upon our future. But I also think that we have the possibility to consume less and also to produce less if we realize what sometimes kind of the bullshit we produce. If you look at the supermarket, for example, especially in kids' toys section, I always find fascinating how much plastic stuff there is that has no additional benefit, neither for the kids nor for the parents. But that's true for so many sections of the supermarket today, where we really have to question ourselves, do we need to produce that? Do we also need to invest time of people working on it to produce? And that's true for so many different services as well that we do in Europe all the time. And whether it's not maybe more useful to use that time that we would save as workers to produce that stuff and use that time for ourselves and value that time that we have to come together with people. I think the Corona pandemic has shown that there's something more valuable than expensive furniture, because you like it for maybe a week, and after that you realize what you really want is friends sitting on the furniture and not so much having it stand around. So it's basically a wooden plank is better filled with friends is better than an expensive leather couch. And maybe we can invest more in that to bring people together, to enjoy time together and to value the time, because time really is the resource that we have the least of. And so, yes, I would really love to see our society focus in future less on GDP and more on time well spent, quality of life, rather than mass production.
I felt that sofa comment very closely. I just put a new one, and I'm now going to spend a lot more time getting friends to sit on it, Nicholas. Joanna, how do you feel about that? Is it realistic that we get European governments to end fossil fuel subsidies? Is that the sort of focus that we need to have now, or is the EU institutions going to take other approaches?
Well, I mean, Europe is the only continent in the world that has committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. So it is very much focused on making it happen and finding ways of how to catalyze the decarbonization of our economy, and to find different business models that also, through circularity, make better and longer use of the very limited available resources. Something that somehow we assume, that it's only about, reducing carbon emissions that will make it. I mean, circularity is a big contributor to decarbonizing. So let's not forget that circularity and making better use and having a fresh look at how we devise things, how we produce, and for what purpose and for how long and with what materials, how much recycled content is there, creating recycled markets, reusability, repairability, rights of consumers to actually have the right of repair, and to end planned obsolescence, for instance. All of this will have a huge effect on how far and how fast we get to carbon neutrality. And not to mention, of course, I haven't even mentioned biodiversity, which is in itself a huge contributor to decarbonization, because nature itself has its own solutions. And the industry should be on its path, different parts of the industry should be on their own path of seeing how they can use carbon, nature-based solutions in their own processes in order to themselves absorb carbon. So there are so many other ways, but I wanted to say as well that, of course, funding and innovation will precipitate this, will catalyze this. And I want to mention, of course, the European Fund for Recovery and Resilience, which I've mentioned earlier. And of course, in the context of COVID, it has given us an even bigger reason for us to bounce back, and to bounce back in a better way. Of course, money doesn't make it all happen, but it does give firepower. And it does give the opportunity, especially if you ring fence the parameters for the member states, that 37%, as we actually do, of the budget needs to be allocated to Green Deal objectives. And this, of course, will precipitate sustainable future, because it's not just only about not harming the environment. It's not about not harming our planet. It's not just living within the limits of the planet, which of course is priority, but we also need to actually divert huge amount of monies and investment in the right type of projects. And what do I mean by right type of projects? It's exactly what I've been mentioning, the new industrial alliances, for instance, for eco-innovation, new types of eco-design, changing the business model to, one based on consumption to one based on use, for instance, rather than consumption. All of these needs to happen as well. And we need to be encouraging successful public-private partnerships as well, because it's not just about public money. Of course, you need to have a good public procurement policy, for instance. Of course, that will help. Of course, you need to revisit the subsidies regime and the governance. But you also need to make sure that private money is also going in the right direction. I need to mention here that the whole Green Deal is based on a very horizontal enabler, if you like, although maybe not so many people will call it an enabler of the do no harm. So that means, that we are henceforth saying that any type of investment needs to be checked against what sort of harm it is inflicting, and in order to absolutely avoid that. But likewise, we need to be also filling up the other part of the bottle with the investments going in the right direction, as opposed in the wrong direction.
Okay. Nadège, you'll get the final word. We've only got 2 or 3 minutes left now. I was wondering, how much do you embrace this idea of innovation and private sector involvement in change? Obviously, they do have a role. I'm not saying they wouldn't be involved, but it was controversial when John Kerry said, we're yet to invent half of the technologies that will help us get to net zero. And I wonder where you see that balance between investing in the new innovations and technologies versus really just simply changing our lifestyles and moving away from consumption patterns.
Yeah, well, I would kind of disagree with that idea that we have like that much technology to discover. Honestly, I think that as of today, we have like most of the technology needed to reach our climate targets. And actually, I forgot I would have checked this report before, but I know there was a consultancy firm that released different scenarios to reach the 2030 European target, and it was clear that the best way to reach it is to change behaviors of peoples and ways of living. I think that the main problem of climate crisis and biodiversity loss is not that we have not enough technology, is that we use it too much and too fast and just in a useless way. I would say so. No, I think that what we need is a system change and a behavioral change. But I would insist on the fact that behavioral change is like really important in the head of the consumer and the citizens. But we know that if everyone lived as like a perfect green little citizen, like we would not reach the climate target. Like we need policymakers to take up on these YPI indicators and to actually divest, of course, from fossil fuel subsidies, need to stop harmful policies, just like common agricultural policy, for instance. I think that it's not like it could be much better because it's still incentivizing farmers to do like intensive agriculture, and like these kind of policies should not be okay in 2021. And I think, of course, we had to invest much more in circular economy plans. So no, I would say that less is more, and that we really think we really need political will at the end. I think that's the key, really, political will. I think we have most of the solution, that we must implement them.
Thanks so much, Nadège. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to stick to the principle less is more also for this panel, but it's been a great discussion, even if it was a brief one. So thank you to you, Nadège, Nicholas, Joanna. We really appreciate your time and glad to see you all engaging with the index. And now I'll hand it back to Maria at the European Youth Forum.
Yeah, thank you a lot again for you, Ryan, Nadège, Nicholas, and Joanna for this engaging discussion on a topic that young people is leading all across the globe. And it's clear that we need to rethink how to look at progress and put more attention to environmental and also social indicators. I remember and keep on thinking on the metaphor you brought, Nadège, what to do if our house is on fire, and should we consider progress at all if this impacts so negatively to our planet and also to the well-being of young people? Thank you again for these reflections. Then we are moving to our next topic on the agenda today, that is COVID-19 and how this has impacted young people. For that, we have had some discussions in the previous days. So first, we will have a conversation with Maria Walsh, which is a member of the European Parliament, who was interviewed by Hannah Grieve, the Senior Communications Officer of the European Youth Forum. And then I engaged in an interactive discussion moderated by Valentina Bob at the Financial Times. So we will go with that.
My name is Maria Walsh. I'm the youngest Irish MEP representing a constituency called Midlands Northwest, which is 13 counties and represents about 1.1 million people, quite urban and rural, and the most westerly point in the European Union. And here in the Parliament, I sit in the European People's Party.
So COVID has exacerbated many existing inequalities that young people were facing. What would you say are the biggest obstacles that we need to overcome today?
What we've seen from COVID and what I would call long before COVID and what I believe will be long after would be the impact on mental health and well-being for younger people, mental health literacy, how we talk about mental health, how in each member state we need to lift and look at the stigma and taboo associated with mental health. I even look at my own generation. This is potentially our second recession, our first pandemic. And when you look at that and you look at the numbers and the fact that it's reports are showing 1 to 3 years post the recession that we've really seen this increase on mental health. I believe this will be our second pandemic, and it's certainly something I'm very conscious of. While it's not a competency of the institution that stands behind me, I am calling on and working with MEPs from right across the political house to develop and bring forward a European year of good mental health, so that we look at how mental health can be worked on cross-sectionally. So policy groups, youth organisations, MEPs, national member states, that we're looking and every time our finance ministers sign a cheque or we're deciding on a new strategy, that we're constantly bringing in the mental health element to it. So for me, mental health is something that I really believe from a youth perspective as a young politician. If I don't constantly bring it forward, particularly now at the crossroads that we're at, then I'd be doing a disservice.
So COVID-19 has led to a sharp rise in youth unemployment, with many young people facing and difficulties in finding entry-level positions. And young people generally are the first to lose their jobs in economic crisis. How can the EU address this issue, and also speaking as you're part of the Employment Committee?
Yeah, for sure. And actually for two committees that I sit on, both the Employment and Social Affairs Committee and Culture and Education, back to the cross-sectional idea that MEPs working with national member states and organisations to look at skills gaps, that we're encouraging people to journey on that lifelong learning experience, so that if younger people are coming out of secondary school and either thinking about going into third level, that we're talking about and future-proofing courses. So AI, robotics, I think it's like 60 million jobs in the next 5 to 10 years. So how are we equipping young people with those skills from a younger age, so that then when they come out of secondary school, that they're able to walk into, be it part-time jobs or full-time roles or further education spaces. I also think there's a need to look at it from vocational education training programs. Again, how do we lift the stigma towards a traditional role like farming in young people, and cross-sectional work with the Green New Deal. As the westerly point that I represent in my constituency, Midlands Northwest in Ireland, we have huge opportunities in terms of offshore wind farms. And again, bringing younger people and youth perspective into that is so important, because there's what's driving the green agenda, not just in Ireland, but across the EU. So bringing them in and looking at what skills that we know is coming down the pipeline, but also what they're most interested in is really important in terms of bridging the gap between youth unemployment and the skills that we will definitely need in the next 5-10 years. But for me, I'm a conversationalist politician. We cannot make decisions for younger people without them involved in the conversation table. And I would hate if an unemployment conversation came up and I didn't make a pitch for younger people to get involved in politics. I think that's a really important thing to also mention, because it is a great career. It's very purposeful led, difficult at times, but we need younger people at the decision-making table in order for us to learn from them and future-proof better.
The Youth Progress Index gives us a snapshot of what life is like for young people in different European countries and also around the world. How do you see adding value to policy making, and how valuable is it to have such a data source?
Yeah, the index is invaluable. Again, we're not talking to younger people enough, and having the index allows us to directly connect to the youth issues that are at the forefront of their minds, so that when we're working in the cross-sectional way that we need to, across committee level, across institutions, work with organisations on the grassroots and member states, that we're constantly using the most valuable source of information we have, the youth voice, and that came through in the index. I'm not surprised to see unemployment, future-proofing roles, wanting to see more of and connect more with the political landscape. But it certainly reassured me that my team and I are moving in the right way. We just need to make sure that the entire ship is moving with us. And again, the index just consistently makes us aware that youth and youth issues have to be relevant and have to be at the forefront of everything we do. Otherwise, institutions like this begin to break down because we're not future-proofing and we're not bringing young people into the conversation. And ultimately, that's what we need to do more of, and the index allows us to do that.
Well, hello and welcome everyone. I'm very pleased to be the moderator for this session. My name is Valentina Popa. I'm a journalist here with the Financial Times. And on this panel, we will explore what COVID has done to young people around the world, what the fallout is, but also how we could bring back optimism and give some hope to young people around the world. With me, I have the pleasure to welcome Salam Al-Nukta, who is the CEO and co-founder of Changemakers. Hi, Salam. And Maria Rodriguez, who is the member of the European Youth Forum Board. Hi, Maria. So first off, I wanted to ask a broad question, like how do you feel that young people have been affected by the COVID crisis? We see, for instance, with vaccination queues that they are often left at the very end. In some countries, schools haven't reopened as fast as people wanted. So what impact do you see, Salam, on young people with the COVID crisis?
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, I'm Valentina for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to also be here. Well, if I'm going to speak about inequalities and the changes that COVID-19 brought to our lives, it's a very broad, of course, topic. And inequalities or challenges are very different from one group to another. And I mean one group of young people to another, because of course, young people are not a homogeneous group. And let me focus on young people from countries where which actually remain underrepresented in most of reports due to hardships of collecting data. And being coming actually from Syria, I've always been following the news. Young people have stopped going to their school, to universities. Social life has been also very, very different. If it's a big family, then the whole family is in the house. If it's a small family, then it's probably that the young person does not get a lot of interaction with other family members. So it's a lot of changes on many levels: academic, professional, social, and emotional life, and emotional aspects. This is the answer in a nutshell. But if there is an opportunity to, of course, talk more about this, then I'm happy to elaborate.
Okay, thank you, Salam. And Maria, from your perspective, maybe you can also talk a little bit about what the European Youth Board is doing, and how do you see the problems currently facing young people?
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you for engaging in this discussion. Actually, what we have seen, we made a report together with the International Labour Organization in 2020, last year, after the COVID pandemic just started. Mm-hmm. And we realized that young people have lost our jobs 2 times faster than the general population in the worldwide, in all the world. But in Europe particularly, we have been losing our jobs at a rate 3 times faster than the rest of the population. So this replies also to the low quality of the jobs that young people were having. And now we need to face the consequences of this virus and this pandemic, because we were already at very much risk of poverty, young people in general in the world, but particularly in Europe, as I said. So now we also have the challenge of making young people able to access to social protection that in many countries we are not even able to access due to age discrimination. So that's the situation that COVID-19 is creating for young people. And for sure, now the perspectives that we have are quite more negative. once we have seen that our jobs, that we don't have an opportunity to access a job, but also we have just our education has been disrupted during this year. So that is also affecting our mental health disproportionately regarding to the rest of the population. So it's very common to see young people having symptoms of anxiety and depression, and that's something that we really need to act right now to improve this youth progress.
Yeah, so a lot of for policymakers and people in power basically to act upon and to consider. Salam, when I wanted to go back to you and ask you a little bit about your organization and what you are doing for young people, well, in this crisis, but also in general in finding a career or giving counseling. Can you tell us more about Changemakers?
Absolutely. So Changemakers, when it was founded in 2016, it actually focused on the social impact that it's bringing, and that's reducing the gender gap in the tech field. Mainly because we were motivated by the very low numbers of girls pursuing their academic and their academic and professional career and professional path and in the tech industry. When COVID-19 actually surprised the world, let's say, we realized that it's not possible anymore to put young people at risk, especially in countries where it's already at risk due to conflict or for other reasons. So we started to look for other ways to engage with young people and to keep, of course, the momentum we've been building and encouraging more young girls to engage in the tech industry. So we moved our courses from being programs provided physically on a physical site. We moved that online, and we had one experiment when we provided young people with courses online, and that was just a very youth-led initiative from the team. They were just sitting at home discussing what we can do better, and then we just found out that maybe we can try an online course. But knowing that young people in countries like, for example, like Syria, don't have adequate access to internet facilities or probably devices, we did not want to invent the wheel. We did not want to create a very new curriculum, a lot of graphics, so it's heavier to be downloaded. So that's what we did. We tried to do a very simple initiative, engaged with young people at the ages between 15 and 21. And we provided a very similar course to the ones we provided physically, but we did it completely online. We did not want to only provide courses in programming, but also we wanted to let young people learn that social media, Facebook, can be used to further than just meet new people or navigate through news or the day-to-day things that young people usually do. Because one thing that's very important, and we noticed the effects during COVID-19 even more than previously, is that opportunities are only accessible to those who can look for them, who learn to look for them. So we wanted to send this message, and besides also providing them with programming skills and letting them advance their say practical skills.
And was it only in English, or what was the language?
Yeah, well, that's the thing that we always try to do, because education materials are very very extensive or very accessible in English, but not as much in Arabic. And English is not, of course, a very common language in Arab states. So our courses are provided in Arabic.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, and I actually a thought just crossed my mind in during the pandemic, there were many concerns that because of the exposure, this is mostly for younger children, but I suppose also for teenagers, right? The exposure to screens being completely off the charts. I mean, before the pandemic, there was always this concern from parents to limit the exposure to screens and to get them outside and play and so on. And now with online schooling and an initiative like yours, I suppose this is really no longer a concern. But I wonder if you have any thoughts, like, is it in a way, was the focus perhaps misled? Was the concern exaggerated, or is there something real to just being looking at screens all day? To both of you, actually.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't have really a very solid scientific background to give an answer right now. Personally, I don't prefer kids or teenagers spending a lot of time next to their screens. And I think this issue has been really very exacerbating during COVID-19, because if parents just want to give kids something to play with while they're doing their jobs, while they're at meetings or so. And I hope that with all of the initiatives that we're introducing, we still keep parents or guardians, say, aware of the balance between physical activities and screen time. Because if you can't do a course physically, you can still do it online, but it's still the family's responsibility to make sure that their kids, of course, are engaged in physical activities. And it does not really have to be outside with a lot of other people, right? So it can still be with the parent, and I think it's a very nice way to strengthen the bonds in the family.
Yeah, actually, I think we all have learned a lot on how to manage digital activities and also in education. But it's true that we are already quite tired of this online world, and we are really looking forward to the physical activity again. But I want to raise one concern in here, because normally we are understood as the digital generation. But it's true that not all young people can have access to digital devices or even internet. So in there, we also have a challenge, because it's not true that we all can have access to this. And that's also one struggle that we have had regarding education in this pandemic year. So yeah, I mean, we all learned on how to improve our digital skills. Also, the schools have had an improvement in this regard. But yeah, it's true that there is still a lot of room for improvement.
So if you were to, if you were to wave a magic wand and had the powers to really make change and allocate budgets and hire staff or whatever, what would you like to see for the young people if you were the Minister of Education and you for the world?
Well, if I had one, that could be super difficult, because, well, right now I could go for working on poverty and making all young people able to access social protection system, because that's something that not all of us have access right now, and we are in an unemployment situation. We are not able to access new employment when we transit from the education to the labor market. So that would be my thing, not having age discrimination in accessing social protection systems.
And Salam?
I'm a big fan of equal opportunities, and I think if we work on more integration programs for everyone, we provide them with equal opportunities to either access the internet or choose not to access the internet. But as long as they have the choice to access whatever tools they want to access, then I think we solved a lot of issues anyway. Because with the internet, I think young people don't only access education, but they also access employment. And of course, COVID-19 showed us that it is very possible to do almost any kind of profession from your home at your desk. So once we have this equal opportunity to access the world from our screens, then I think gender equality, poverty, economic advancement, sustainability, many things can be solved.
And I just wanted to come back quickly on the issue of vaccination. I know that in some parts of the world, vaccines have now been also approved for children and in younger people. But do you think that this situation where the focus was mainly on adults and older people is creating, at least this year, like another layer of discrimination? Because obviously you can't travel, you can't go out, you're restricted in so many ways as far as you're not vaccinated.
Yeah, it's true that this is creating a new layer of discrimination, as you said, and we have been seeing this all around alongside the pandemic, and with all the restriction and measures were only thought or mainly thought for adults. And normally young people, we were also discriminated in even the approach that we were looked at. So yeah, I think this is creating a new discrimination, and hopefully also the governments will make sure that even if we are not vaccinated, or we will have the access to the same activities, or that we will be able to, yeah, I don't know, at any time soon get also the vaccine. But it's true that we are the least, the last on the list. So yeah.
The last on the list, but least but not last. Yes, Salam, you wanted to say something.
Yes, actually, I wanted to say that this kind of discrimination, I think, is going to have a lot of negative results on communities overall, because with this kind of discrimination, I think it's increasing the mental and psychological consequences for young people, because sometimes young people are not only responsible for themselves, but they're responsible for their families, for elderly people, and if they don't feel safe to interact with the world, then they're probably going to lock themselves in their houses, because they need to take care of their beloved ones. So I think if I have the chance to get this magical stick again, then I would actually change the policy from making this vaccination rule based on age. And I will change the assessment that we base our decisions on. It's probably based on need, it's collective factors, right? It's not just age. So I would also change that.
And we're nearing the end of this discussion, but I don't want to end before we actually also address the issue of how we can bring optimism back and a little hope. This was one of the points that we're really supposed to tackle. So how do we bring optimism back for young people?
Well, I think that right now we are presenting a huge tool for optimism with this Youth Progress Index, because it's a tool for policymakers to understand which is the overview of the situation of young people or across the world, and which are the most pressing issues. And also it's a good opportunity to be able to understand what is happening in some of the countries that this situation is working the best. So for me, that's a topic for optimism, to be honest. I mean, we can now see where to look at for finding good results. So yeah, it's the moment to take the good practices and implement them.
Knowledge brings optimism. And Salam, what about you? How do you
I wouldn't add anything to Maria's thoughts. I think they're brilliant. If only we can send the copy to every policymaker for them to read, to understand the consequences of young people's involvement, and we can make true changes.
And one day you will be the policymakers themselves, maybe.
Yes.
In the near future. Well, thank you so much, both of you. This has been really interesting and lovely, and I hope to our audience out there on the internet, this was also interesting. Stay safe, get vaccinated, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
So indeed, this Youth Progress Index is a topic for optimism, a reason for optimism, and particularly if policymakers take it into account for making policy. So next up in our program today is discussing about civic space and youth rights. For those of you who are not familiar with this, civic space is the place, both physical and online space, where people exercise our freedom of association, our freedom of expression, and peaceful assembly. It allows us to engage in society and also engage in policy making. A thriving civic society can be presumed as well as a critical enabling young people to have social progress. But in the last few years, we have witnessed a persistent silencing of youth organizations and young people voices. And we wonder how this has impacted our capacity to mobilize and advance social causes. For this, we will have now John Lisney, who is the EU lead and research analyst of the Social Progress Imperative. And recently he sat down with Michael O'Flaherty from the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency. Then we will have a live discussion moderated by Elmira Berasli, co-founder of Foreign Policy Interrupted. We again invite you to engage in this conversation via Twitter with the hashtag #AskYouthProgress, because we will have time to bring your questions to the discussion. So now let's go with John.
Hi, I'm John Lisney. I'm EU Lead and Research Analyst for the Social Progress Imperative. And joining us today is Michael O'Flaherty, who is the Director of the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. Michael, if I may, would you like to maybe start by saying a few words about yourself and about the agency that you lead and the work you do to advance human rights in the EU?
Thanks, John. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm at the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, which is the body with responsibility to support the EU, its member states and its institutions to respect human rights in their work. At least in their work, meaning when they're working on issues that are the business of the EU. We focus within the geography of the member states. We're purely advisory, and so we're only as good as the advice we offer. And our advice is very strongly evidence-based. We're in a constant exercise of gathering human rights sensitive data across the 27 member states to support law and policy on all of the hot issues. So we're working on migration, we're working on artificial intelligence, we're working in support of the Roma, of minorities, in particular migrant minorities into Europe. We're working on issues of social justice. We're trying to make sure that human rights is at the heart of some of the great big policy developments of the Union. The different strategies being developed right now, the upcoming conference on the future of Europe, and so forth. We're all based in Vienna. We're about 140 people. So a huge task, small operation.
Great, thank you for that. The topic for today is civic space and youth rights. What would you say are the main barriers and challenges that young people and youth organizations in particular face in Europe in terms of their capacity to mobilize and ensure that their rights are upheld?
I'll start by saying that your own report that's just come out captures in essence some of the core answers to your question. But that said, let me take a few different layers of response. In the first place, youth movements, youth organizations form part of general civil society. And we've known for years that civil society is under pressure. The way the pressure shows is different from country to country. Its intensity is different from country to country. But if we were to find 4 characteristic pressure points, they would be, in the first place, financial pressure, lack of access to resources, taxation systems that can undermine, lack of access to foreign funding, many other things of that nature. Second, regulatory pressure. An excessive regulation of the operation of civil society, how you can set up your organization, how many members you can have, what the rule book of your organization is, how you report back to the state, rules about your meetings, and on it goes. These can be very burdensome in some places. Third pressure point has to do with access to the decision of the policymakers. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't communicate them to the people who make the decisions, then you really are limited in your ability to influence. And fourth and finally, and fortunately rarely, we have direct threat and intimidation and harassment for individuals, for organization, and for property. So those four, all at different levels, different intensity, very much different country situations. One interesting dimension of the variety of representations is how, depending on what you work on, you may or may not face heightened pressure. So if you work, for example, on LGBTI issues in some European countries, you're going to find it much harder than if you were working on some other more, let's call them, not the right word, but more mainstream types of activity or issue. Now, all of this got far worse with COVID. 2020 was a year of heightened risk and pressure to civil society. And by the way, that's not a theoretical statement. We know that from our ongoing conversation with the many hundreds of civil society groups that we deal with. We saw, for example, excessive limits on assembly and association. It's legitimate to limit certain human rights in fighting the pandemic, but the limits have to be necessary and they have to be proportionate. They have not always been necessary and proportionate. We've also seen a drying up of money for many organizations, and we've seen even less access than previously to the policymakers, with physical meetings disappearing, with the online space getting overcrowded, or maybe with an overlooking of certain consultation steps that you might otherwise have had. There's been even less access than would otherwise have been the case. So 2020, a particularly tough year for civil society in general, but also for young people's groups. Last thing I'll say, I travel around Europe as much as I can, and certainly before the COVID, the pandemic, and I listen as much as I can, and I keep hearing from young people's organizations right across Europe that they have great ideas, they want to engage, they want to participate in shaping the future. They don't get the chances. So in other words, if you're in a young person's organization, you've got even less chance than the rest of COVID society to be allowed play your part in the necessary debates.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. One of the findings of the Youth Progress Index report is also that there's a clear lack of data collected on this issue of restrictions on civic space. What are your thoughts on this, and what can be done to address this issue?
I saw this finding. To be honest, I met it with some surprise. Because I would argue that we actually have plenty of data. Maybe we don't know it and use it enough. My own agency now for a number of years has been following the situation closely. A couple of major reports on threats to European civil society based on engaging with civil society right across the EU. And we do an annual update with the 800 organizations that participate in our civil society space, what we call the Fundamental Rights Platform. Side by side with our work, just staying in the EU, you have the now annual Rule of Law reports produced by the Commission, which will increasingly include attention to the situation of civil society within each of the member states. And these are just two of a number of initiatives, both in the public and in the more, not private sector, but more in the non-governmental sector. What I would concede is that maybe they're not well enough known. Our own reports are still relatively new, and maybe there isn't enough pickup yet. And that's a challenge to us to get them out there so that they can better inform the debates. And what I would also concede is that while I think we're doing a reasonably good job of data collection, we should also look at what other instruments to add to our toolbox in the same context. It's not, I think, an EU competency, not something the EU could appropriately do, but somebody that has the capacity and the mandate and the resources should look at developing an EU observatory with regard to threats against civil society, so that they're captured in real time and can be responded to in real time. That would be a very useful service, which I've been calling for it now for a couple of years. And maybe there's some organization listening to us today that might like to further explore this. And I speak about civil society writ large, but this point is no less valid when we focus on the youth sector.
I'll definitely be looking into that. The report also finds a strong relationship at national level between civic space restrictions and youth progress, meaning that the more restrictions there are on civil society, the less young people are able to advance their social causes. So what role do you see for the European Union in terms of supporting young people and youth organizations in this regard?
Well, first, I think the finding is completely unsurprising. I would have been surprised by any other finding. A thriving civil society, including its youth component, is one of the legs of the stool that is a democracy. So if you pull away or you damage that leg, the whole stool crumbles. So that doesn't surprise me in the least. We need a strong, vibrant, rich, engaged, challenging, difficult, stimulating civil society with a youth voice loud at its heart in order to propel our societies into the future. Those conversations may not always be easy, but they are necessary. In that spirit, I welcome a few initiatives that I see right now in 2021. Most famously, there's the Conference on the Future of Europe. It is giving a privileged space to young people's voices. Let's make sure that that's taken full advantage of. Let's use the Conference on the Future of Europe to get a sense of where Europe's young people want Europe to go. Not just for their own future, but for now. I don't like this, people often say, involve young people because it's their future. Yeah, great, fine, I get that. But I want to involve young people also for my future, for now, not just for the future. And I think in the conference context, we can pull that off. Another among many current initiatives is the Fundamental Rights Forum that my own agency organizes every 3 years. It'll take place 11 and 12 October of this year. It'll be hybrid, bit in Vienna, but much of it online, multiple hubs across Europe. And we're working very hard to make sure that young people's voices are heard loud and clear through the forum discussion and reflected then in its outcomes, which are about coming up with smart solutions for tough human rights problems. All of this work, by the way, is based on a recognition in the Lisbon Treaty of the distinctive role of young people. So, you know, it's rare to see young people, children sometimes, yes, in treaties, but not often young people. It's rare to see young people given a privileged, prioritized visibility in the foundational instrument of something like the European Union. Let's make it our goal in the next few years to bring those words to life in terms of societies that cherish young people and within which young people thrive, including in the leadership of all of us.
I'm sure that's a message that the European Youth Forum, who are the leads on this project, will be welcoming with open arms. Michael O'Flaherty, thank you so much for taking the time today to discuss this very important topic and for your participation in this event. So,
John, my thanks to you, and again, good luck with the event, and well done on all the great work.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elmira Beyrasli, and I am super excited to be moderating this next section. I hope you've all been enjoying this Youth Progress Summit. And I think it comes at a really important time, just as we have all spent the past year in our respective locations dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, very eager to connect with one another. But I think most importantly to really get on with the work that we had been doing and that we're eager to do. And so I'm super excited to moderate this particular panel of the Youth Progress Summit. We're going to be talking about civil society and civil space, which, as Michael O'Flaherty just pointed out, is absolutely indispensable in every aspect of our functioning societies. In this session, we're going to dive into what's been happening to the civil society space in the past year. And it's a topic that I think is going to be very familiar to everyone tuning in. Starting with how COVID-19 has impacted communities, particularly marginalized groups and minorities. They have been disproportionately impacted, as many of those groups have been frontline workers and been, whether it's at the hospital, transportation workers, getting people around on public transport, or delivering goods and services. And it's also shown a light on the deep systematic inequalities in our society. And a number of our panelists are very familiar with that topic and have really been diving into that in their work. COVID restrictions also have limited people's capacity to meet and mobilize, which has very much limited civil society gatherings. And that's contributed to a further growing global trend of a shrinking of civil society space, and we're going to explore that. So how can youth-driven social movements become the change that we need for future generations? While we're seeing governments restrict movement and in some places restrict civil society space altogether, and how have COVID and related measures contributed to further restrictions on young people's ability to mobilize for social causes? And to answer that, we've got a really great panel. I am so excited. I know, Sherry, I just saw your tweet. I'm excited. I woke up excited too. Sherry Davis is coming to us from Oakland. I think you're coming to us from Oakland. Yes, Sherry?
That's right.
Sherry is the co-executive director of a really wonderful organization, the Participatory Budgeting Project, which also has offices here where I am in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm super excited to get to know this organization much better. The Participatory Budgeting Project empowers people to decide together how to spend public money. And this is really, I mean, when I heard about this, I thought this is a wonderful effort. It creates and supports participatory budgeting processes that deepen democracy, build stronger communities, and make public budgets more equitable and effective. We are also joined by Matej Grudin. Am I saying that correctly? Oh, good. I got it. I nailed it. I've been practicing all morning. Who is the director of democratic participation at the Council of Europe. And I think that should be a familiar organization to all of us. It was founded in the wake of World War II to uphold human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Europe. And we're also joined by Yasmin Wirani, who is the founder of We Belong in Europe, which is a platform and podcast series that amplifies the voice of the new daughters of Europe and young women with immigrant backgrounds. So if you're on your phones, get on and make sure that you subscribe to her podcast. But I'd love to kick off the discussion by looking at what has been. Oh, and Darius, you are joining us. Wonderful! I'm so happy to have you here. We're also joined by Darius Baxter, who is the president and CEO of Good Projects.
Hey, everyone.
Good Projects is based in Washington, D.C., and it is focused on basically eliminating any roadblocks to any basic needs for families and young people, so that they can actually go out there and make progress and live their lives free from poverty, and helping them have that growth mindset. Wonderful to have you, Darius.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I guess it speaks to all the many different people that you all have gathered here today. I realize we had some time zone differences, but I'm glad to be able to join you all. I'll be able to stay for a few minutes, but I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all so much for the invite.
Great. So Darius, if you aren't able to stay with us, maybe we can start with you. It's because you're working in the space of poverty and economic inequality. We're seeing a lot of changes, and we're seeing how that gap is dividing between rich and poor. even far before the COVID-19 crisis. Can you talk about how it's impacted your work on helping young people and families in the Washington, D.C. area?
Well, I think, and that's a great question. And thank you so much for leading off with that. I think for a lot of organizations, right, and this is not a knock, but one of the reasons I get invited to these things is because I shoot it straight. You know, for a lot of organizations, am I amongst family and friends? Are we talking straight here today?
Absolutely. Talk straight. I'm a straight talker. I'm from New York.
Okay. Well, you know, even pre-pandemic, I think the social impact space just as a whole has always done a great job of making excuses. And one of my idols, mentors, advocates, I look to Jeffrey Canada, and the work that he did in the Harlem Children's Zone is really the exception to the rule when it comes to the social impact space. And this quote that he said, it always stuck with me and inspires the work that I do. He said, "Education is the only billion-dollar industry that's failing and still gets funded year over year over year." And I heard that and I was like, well, damn, he's right. He's absolutely right. It's like almost like philanthropy, social impact just gets a pass. And so here we were in the midst of a global pandemic where people were losing jobs at record rates, where people were unable to have access to food, where people were losing their homes, clearly where a disease was running rapid in low-income communities, and even greater effect on low-income communities of color, and where you saw sort of investment in philanthropy skyrocket. But at the same time, you also saw the actual organizations that should have been running to the fire. Everybody went into strategic planning mode. And so for good projects, it was important for us that, yeah, we, like most, if not all other organizations, we went into a strategic planning mode. And at the same time, we understood that there was immediate need that needed to be met. And we went above and beyond to do that. Where across the board, when I look at social impact and I look at philanthropy, I didn't necessarily see that same thing outside of, a few big 5 to 10 organizations. But now as we roll out of the pandemic, and I'll end on this point, my hope will be that all of the strategic planning that has really taken place over the last year and a half, we can start to see the benefits of it, particularly when it comes to young people and young people of color.
Great. Thank you, Darius. Sherry, I want to bring you in since you work specifically on budgeting. And as we've seen, many people, budgets have been cut. A lot of cities and communities have lost tax resources. Unemployment has been very high. Your organization is very much focused on deciding how public funds are going to be spent in various communities. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the work that you're doing?
Well, first of all, let me just say, excited to be here. And if you see me squinting or frowning, it's because it happens to be very sunny in California at this moment in time. So it's not true. It's like a really good problem to have if I'm squinting into the camera.
I'm jealous.
I wish I could spread it around, y'all. But to answer your question, when we talk about budgets, especially in instances where resources are finite, when things get tough, I think that the question I heard was, how has our work been impacted? And maybe one thing to make really clear is that the Participatory Budgeting Project, we don't decide how funds are spent. We support a framework that allows people, community members, to really lean into their voice, speak forward what issues they're facing, and then actually engineer solutions that would meet their needs based on their expertise, their lived experience. So the work that we do at the Participatory Budgeting Project is really challenging the system to consider a different way of budgeting, to consider a different way of making decisions, and to really value the lived experience, expertise, and the impact of what community-driven decision-making can do to solve really complex problems. Now, in this moment of COVID, financial constriction, and budget cuts, I understand that many people can hear things like participatory budgeting and say, well, that sounds like a nice thing to do when you have a surplus of funds. But I actually think it's really important when there are finite and limited resources. What better way to make sure that spending is efficient, is going to have a huge impact, than making sure that community members are able to identify, kind of dictate community spending priorities so that we can map those onto government spending priorities and make tough decisions together. And I think that the way that our work has really changed at this moment is really around framing for root causes, really around this comment that I heard before that like young people, community members are not future leaders, they're leaders now. In the world, the radical, imagined world that we're talking about, we can live in it now and we can make some decisions right now. And so whether that means with COVID, really thinking about direct cash support, how we mobilize dollars to people that need them at a specific moment, whether that looks like a broader recovery plan and how we make sure that there's an opportunity for bottom-up decisions so that communities' needs are met. Those are some of the ways that our work is pivoting. And I'll just say that when it comes to young people, I'm seeing a lot of young people actually in school systems really consider what it looks like to be able to make some decisions, not only about what their school day looks like, but about how resources support their joy at school, their health at school, and how we can engineer, how they can engineer decisions like that. Look at Brooklyn, where you are, where there's a safe schools participatory budgeting process, where high school students are determining what they need to keep them safe. And then there's a pot of funds over $500,000 that they decide on so that funds are spent to meet their needs in terms of safety. And so that's the kind of movement that I think we're seeing right now across the United States, but I think globally.
Great, thank you so much, Sherry. Matej, I want to bring you into this discussion from the institutional point of view. Sherry just talked about young people and decision-making. Are there working best practices on facilitating genuine youth participation in decision-making processes, especially since you've seen it from the Council of Europe perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I just want to say that also I am also really very, very excited to be with you. Can you hear me? I had some problems. Excellent. To be with some really exceptional people. I looked up some of the things that you're doing, and I'm really humbled. Really honored to be here with you. I may be squinting as well because there is sunny also here in Eastern France. But Sherry, I tell you, it's no California, so I'm also jealous, even with sunshine. I'm coming from the Council of Europe. It's an intergovernmental organization. It's bringing back together 47 governments that agreed to a set of rules, legally binding rules, and if they do not respect them, citizens can take them to a court, which is just here across the street, and that's a great thing. Now, in order to do that, I will respond to your question, and it will not take too long. In order to do that, there are certain things that they are not allowed to do, that they should refrain from doing: violate human rights, civic rights, political freedoms. And then there's the whole other segment that is important, and that is certain things they should do, creating conditions in which those rights that they have commit themselves to respect can be enjoyed. And what I do in the organization, I'm the director of democratic participation, is being responsible for activities that are largely devoted to that, creating an environment in which the European Convention of Human Rights can be fully enjoyed by the European citizens. And of course, a very important part of that is the youth work and youth cooperation, our youth activities. We have 40 years of experience of a good practice, I can say, in the organization itself. It's going to be 40 years that we have something which we call co-management, which means that representatives of youth organizations, different youth organizations in Europe, are participating in the decision making on the policies, youth-related policies in the organization. So that in itself, I think it's an example of good practice, and it's something that we're trying to encourage member states and support them in introducing also at local and national levels. Now, the difficulty, of course, right now is that when it comes to the circumstances and respect for commitments to this organization, we are facing difficulties both when it comes to the things that governments should not do and to the things that they should be doing. We have problems on both sides of this equation, and it's really affecting our capacity and the situation in which young people are living in Europe and can be participating even in the examples of the best practice that exist. And it's serious. It's something that, of course, got worse with COVID. This was already mentioned, but it did not start with COVID. I mean, COVID put some things on steroids. It accelerated and aggravated some trends that existed before. We've seen things that were happening and were preoccupying that were happening years ago, the trends that accelerated and affected, again, as it is very often the case, disproportionately young people in particular. So this is a concern. What we're trying to do is to respond to that through the concrete policy measures that we recommend to our governments. We are having specific guidance that is being discussed but needs to be approved by governments that will be sent there. But as I said, it is sometimes an uphill battle because the environment in which we work here in Europe, but I think it's something that will, of course, also have relevance for also you on the other side in the United States. The environment is deteriorating, and that again is affecting the situation of young people and their possibility, their opportunities that they have to participate meaningfully in decision making that affects them.
Great. And for our audience, please use the hashtag #AskYouthProgress if you want to get a question in. We don't have a whole lot of time, but I did want to pick up on something, Matej, that you said, how COVID has put the problems that had existed previously on steroids. And I think that what we've seen, whether it is in the United States or whether it is in Europe, not only is economic inequality a very big challenge, but so is racism and accepting of different communities. So Yasmin, I'd like to actually bring you into the discussion because you work with immigrant groups. You know, I appreciated what Matej just said about, you know, governments should create the conditions, but a lot of those conditions are often, you know, lost on immigrant communities. How have you seen immigrant communities in Europe try to you know, advance themselves in Europe, go ahead with the work that they're doing on every front? How have you seen it impact your work?
Absolutely. So as the podcast host at We Belong, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very happy to join you. But as the podcast host at We Belong, I am in charge of interviewing women from all across Europe who have different backgrounds, different stories, different roles that they cover, right? And the common point that I see every time is the discriminations they face, whether they are Asian, from Asian backgrounds, whether they are from, Afro-descendants, or whether they are actually refugees. We have been able to discuss to these women and gather some of these stories. And what we see is often a need for representation, a need for a more mainstream media portraying those stories. And this is why We Belong. We want to make sure that, you know, we amplify their voices. And as we call them, for us, they are the new daughters of Europe, because we want to put the emphasis on the fact that we are also citizens of our respective member states in Europe. being myself Italian, I want to particularly talk about the Italian context today, because I was lucky enough to be half Italian, so to be born with an Italian citizenship. But there is still a lot of Italian, or people that actually live in Italy, grew up in Italy, and live there for like 18 years, that cannot have access to this citizenship because their parents are not Italian. So there is a need to reform these policies, and for a long time, civil society movements have been asked to reforms in order to give more rights to these young people that actually feel Italian, but they're not enough represented or included also at the political spheres. And we see these pretty much both at the national level, but also at the regional level. I was lucky enough to work with some European institutions, mainly the European Commission, as an appointed expert. And I wish that were more opportunities of this kind given to young people. So moving forward, especially as we think about the importance of civic spaces and including young people in civic spaces, I would say giving them meaningful roles and reflecting on innovation. We are the generation of the fourth industrial revolution, and we are bringing so much potential that can only be exploited if we are truly included and meaningfully included.
Great. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I thought maybe we could do a lightning round as we wrap up and give some advice to the young people out there about how they can participate, whether it's through your organizations or just in general, and give them a sense of direction and hope. Darius, why don't we start with you?
No, thank you. I've just been sitting here, and again, just blessed and honored to be on this panel. God's timing is perfect, and it's not by chance that we ended up here today. I just really want to just say this and implore to the young people that are watching now and they may watch us in the future. It's like, you have to take control of your own education. Like, we live in a time right now where, God bless Uncle Joe and, all the hope and prayers that we've put into him, particularly here in the US, and the influence that we have around the world. But, our education system is abjectly failing young people. It is not providing the skills or the tools to be able to be effective in a global marketplace. It is not giving the skills and the tools to be able to be politically savvy, to be able to manage your own finances. And if you are solely dependent on the 8 to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday education that you are going to receive, and think that that is going to give you what you need to thrive in the country that you will inherit, or the world that you will inherit, then I'm sorry, I'll tell you here straight to your face, like, you're lying to yourself. None of us, and I can say this proudly, and I don't even have to, this is all of our first time connecting. None of us found ourselves here on this panel and doing the great work that we do just solely listening to, our teachers in our classroom. It was going out into the world, exploring and taking control of our education. I'm proud of you all in ways that you can never think or imagine, to already be taking the steps to join events like this. And I'll say this is only step one. Keep going. And always, I'm more than happy to make myself available for any of you all.
Great. Thank you, Darius. Sherry.
All right, lightning. Darius, I'm gonna try to be faster than you, but you just dropped some real gems there. The advice that I have to the young people listening is, you've heard us talk about leadership. We said that young people are not future leaders, they're leaders now. We're talking about you. You are a leader right now. And I think one of the biggest things to understand about leadership is it's not what someone else tells you it is. I believe that really wonderful leaders foster an opportunity for communities to make decisions together. Really great leaders don't make decisions for everyone else. We build a culture of community care. So I think my biggest advice for young people, young leaders, folks that are leaders out there that want to make big systems change, is to show up, ask questions, and number one, believe that you are a leader. And I think that's how we begin to see leaderful systems where people make decisions together. It starts with you, the leaders that are out there.
I love that, leaderful. I'm totally going to steal that. I will attribute it to you, but I'm going to steal it. Thank you, Sherry. Matej.
I don't want to be, I think I'm going to say my advice not to young people, because I think they can live without it, but to my generation, and something that reflects what we are really trying to do at the Council of this field. And that is the message that protecting, expanding civic space, creating opportunities, reinforcing opportunities, real opportunities for participation of young people in decision making, protecting their rights, creating opportunities for youth work, excellent work. It's not something that is important just for young people. Of course it is, but it's an indispensable precondition for us as a society to be able to face the challenges that we have. From climate to social issues, to economic issues, to the digital transformation, everything, you name it, we are simply going to fail miserably if we are not going to have young people at the table looking and deciding and addressing this together. So every way we look at the social products, youth social progress indexes, it's not just measuring the situation of young people across the world, it's really measuring how creative, how progressive, how innovative, and how smart we are as a societies as a whole, or not.
Great. So a message to the leaders out there today, the old people like us, create space for younger people in order to interact and grow. And Yasmin, help us close out our panel.
Well, very good advices from the rest of the panel. So I would conclude maybe saying, especially as we heard before in the previous panel about how much the global pandemic is impacting the future of jobs. Many people might feel stressed about that, or might feel anxious about that. I would say make sure that you surround yourself by people that can mentor you, the people that can support your growth in any way, and the online spaces, you can still find opportunities by, just reaching out to the right people. So don't be afraid to go out there and be proactive. And maybe concluding by saying that I'm having a small mentorship program. It's for free that I do on Sunday mornings. So feel free to book that if you need it. And if I can do my share, my little share by helping, it's always a pleasure, and encourage all the people in the panel to do the same, give back as much as we can, but especially in this time, take care of yourselves and believe in your potential. As Sherry said, we are leaderful, so please continue to do so.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Daria, Sherry, Matej, and Yasmin. And thank you, Social Progress Index. And congratulations on the launch of the Youth Progress Index. It was a pleasure to have this discussion.
Certainly, and I have to say, I'll be remiss if I didn't say, Sherry, I am seasick by your waves. Them things is popping, girl. I see you. I see you. I see you.
Oh, that warmed my heart. I worked hard on that. Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you, Elmira. Thank you all for this engaging discussion on critical issues on our democracy. Thank you, Darius. Thank you, Shadi. Thank you, Jasmine and Matthias. And I'm actually, during the making of this Youth Progress Index, we realized that we lack a lot of data about democracy and civic space. So this is also my call for policymakers to make more collection of gathering of this data, so that we can monitor which is the situation. Thank you again for the discussion. And now I'm very excited to welcome our very last guest in this event today. This is a hip hop group based in Belgium called Fabric Collective. Hello, welcome here.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you well. So thank you for coming with us. And for sure, in this crazy pandemic, we have realized that music and art as an storytelling for social change and for social issues has become more and more important. So I would like to ask you, what do you think is the role that music and art can play and should play in social change?
That's a really good question. Personally, I really believe that, well, art and of any form is actually comes from the subconscious. So it's a form of expressing whatever a person is feeling. And for example, for me personally, I've noticed that it's something I'm working on, and music is helping me a lot with it. But I can be really detached from my own emotions, and I will not be aware of my emotional state until I start making music, and I get into this zone where it's just really just flowing out of me. I'm not really consciously thinking of, yeah, this sounds good, that sounds good. It's just I create a vibe, and then I just find out whatever I'm going through, and then it becomes a song. And unfortunately, Fred isn't here because usually it's me, Mustafa, and Fred Gada together, but he's got at work. So then we'll usually have a conversation about whatever someone has created, and then it usually sparks the creativity for the both of us, and we just expand. But to get more concrete, I think that that this channeling of your emotions is very powerful and very helpful for your mental well-being. And I feel like a lot of nowadays, but maybe it's been this way for a long time, art is being viewed as a product instead of just your expression. And the fact that people view it as a product makes for the fact that people are gonna compare themselves with others, and they're gonna see that, well, this project is worth this much, or this song has X amount of streams on Spotify or whatever. But that's actually taken away from the essence of art, and that's just your expression. And nobody is better at expressing yourself than yourself, and you are not better at expressing someone else's feelings than anyone else. So I really believe that no one's better than you, and you're better than no one. And if you get in touch with yourself, and you get that internal locus of evaluation and control, then you will be able to do beautiful things.
Yeah, thank you, Mustafa. Actually, you also brought one topic that is affecting young people a lot, that is mental issues. So yeah, thank you a lot for sharing this reflection with us. And now I have a question for you as well. Would you like to perform for us?
Yeah, of course. I have a song ready. That's actually about not projecting the past on the future, and you try to be in the now, so you can adapt and just be in the moment and enjoy yourself.
Great, thank you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So here we go. Yeah. Check it. Yeah. Check it. Welcome to the nest, by the way. I don't really think you can help yourself. By dwelling on the past, you might lose your health. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think that helps. No. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think it'll help. I don't really think you can help yourself. By dwelling on the past, you might lose your health. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think that helps. No. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think it'll help. If I were still projecting the past on the future, wouldn't be spitting these bars. I'd still be a hooper who knew I would ever maneuver, racing through them tracks like Hamilton Lewis. Thought that I was going fast, but I was actually moving clueless. Thought I was on the right road cause I was cruising with a certain type of smoothness, but the truth was ruthless. Oh my goodness, blood, sweat, and tears been oh so fruitless. Got shook by the man in the mirror like, who this? Who this? Who this? Who this? Who this? Had to face the fact I was being my own goddamn Judas. Ludicrously reminisce about where I came from, where I is. Counting blessings, had to make a list. Cause only I could be the catalyst. Only I choose the way I live. Calculating the concept of happiness. But the truth is, if you get me in the now, you never know what that really is. I don't really think you can help yourself. By dwelling on the past, you might lose your health. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think that helps. No, no, no. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think it'll help. I don't really think you can help yourself. By dwelling on the past, you might lose your health. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think that helps. No, no, no. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think it'll help.
Now I used to live in denial. Live for tomorrow, no, I cannot
borrow no time.
All got a 24/7. Just like a dream, so I'm
revving, I'm prepping.
I had to learn to love and love to live and love to give and receive them chips. So I learned how to put my goddamn all in there. And I believe in this.
But living in the day, but living in the night.
That's the reason why I'm sleep deprived. I ain't
counting sheep, I just count my losses.
Living in and out like the time is lost.
Yeah. Check it.
Just know that you ain't stepping if you choose to be regretting. Instead of keeping your head up, just wake up and you might learn.
I don't really think you can help yourself. By dwelling on the past, you might lose your health. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think that helps. No, no, no. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think it'll help. I don't really think you can help yourself. By dwelling on the past, you might lose your health. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think that helps. No, no, no. You can blame it all on yourself, but I don't really think it'll help. Nah, I don't think that helps. Nah, that's not the way to fix yourself. Hey, that was it. That song was called by Favorite Collective. It's unreleased, actually.
Thank you a lot for this performance. And actually, with this amazing performance by Fabric Collective, we are done with our program today. So thank you a lot. I would like to say a big thank you to everybody from my side and from the side of the European Youth Forum for engaging with us in this panel today, in this event, both as a speaker and from the audience. And now I must say that we were listening carefully to all our speakers, and we were listening particularly to the commitment that they were making to youth rights. And for sure, we will make sure that we have a follow-up on them. I would like to invite you all now to go check our Youth Progress Index and the Youth Progress Report of 2021 that is available as of now at taping youthprogressindex.org. So there you will find all the results. I'm sure you will have a very enjoyable time playing with the data and also discovering the different indicators of the Youth Progress Index. And for sure, don't forget to use them in advocating for youth rights. Thank you a lot for this, and see you next time.